Welcome to the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. I'm Jeremiah Regan.
And I'm Juan. We're back here with the history of classical music, Pythagoras through Beethoven. We're on to lecture number 3 today, the classical period, Haydn and Mozart.
Joined again by Hillsdale College Online Courses Operations Fellow and concert violinist, Michael Eller. Michael, tell us about Haydn.
I could tell you about Haydn because in undergrad I did a whole research paper on Haydn's creation. To me, the most striking thing about Haydn's music is his use of the sublime. So, for example, in his oratorio, The Creation, it begins with these very disjunct movements within the orchestra that some would consider chaotic. And it was very appropriate, though, because he was trying to depict the earth, formless and void. And as the choir comes to the moment in the music where they sing, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, the whole orchestra joins in a massive tutti section with a huge C major chord, which is arguably the most stable chord in all of music. And so with the creation of light, there was the creation of stability.
Sorry, I get chills when I learn things like that because it just increases the beauty of what you're listening to. And that's why I love this course so much, and because when you listen to classical music, you love it for a reason, and sometimes you can't understand why, because it produces certain emotions that just produce awe in you. And when you learn these things and you connect those things, I think that's what's incredible about it, and what I appreciate so much about this course, because it helps you to do those things.
In addition to his musical genius, Haydn was a generous man, as Professor Knight points out. He mentored many young musicians and composers, including Mozart, who would affectionately refer to him as Papa. Now, you said you could talk all day about Haydn. What can you tell us about Mozart?
Every composer is unique, and the thing that sets apart Mozart is the fact that he was composing music at 5 years old. People make jokes about how Mozart was putting pen to staff paper before he was walking. It wasn't quite that early, but yeah, it takes a certain kind of genius to be writing the music that Mozart wrote at 5 years old.
Once in a millennia type of genius.
Yeah, there hasn't been anyone else like him.
One of my first obviously I had listened to Mozart before, but I got the opportunity to go to Austria when I was in high school with my family, and we were walking down a street in Vienna one day, and my mother looks at a little sign that says, "Oh, concert tonight, Mozart house." And apparently it was Mozart's home, and to this day it is my favorite concert. It was this tiny little room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. I'm probably exaggerating, but you couldn't fit more than 10 people listening to string quartet playing Mozart in this beautiful cupola ceiling with, romantic classical paintings on it, listening to Mozart. It's one of my favorite memories growing up. And it's, again, that combination of many things, just visual beauty and the beauty of music together.
Well, Juan and Michael, just as I mentioned in the last introduction, your descriptions of the music and how it was created makes me want to go back and listen to it myself.
I've just been speaking about concerts, and Hyperion performed a wonderful concert for us as part of this course that you can listen to by going to hillsdale.edu/course. Again, that's hillsdale.edu/course. At the end of the 4 lectures of the course, Hyperion performs some pieces of music that I'm sure you have heard of, such as Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, or Mozart's Rondo alla Turca, and Eine kleine Nachtmusik, Schubert's Ave Maria, and Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. So again, you should go listen to Hyperion's concert at hillsdale.edu/course. And now let's go to lecture number 3, the classical period, Haydn and Mozart, with Dr. Hyperion Knight.
Classical music may be all fun and games when Mozart does it, but at the conservatory, we all had to read this, the classical style, in which Charles Rosen spent hundreds of pages trying to sort out what we mean by the Viennese classical style of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven that became the namesake of classical music. Why practice the piano when I could spend dozens of hours reading this? Why? Well, because defining an artistic style is an important exercise, but it's also an exercise in futility. Great artists are individuals who, by and large, make their own rules, and trying to apply rules to them after the fact is a bit like herding cats. The author E.T.A. Hoffmann, who would famously write the Nutcracker tale that became Tchaikovsky's ballet, was so enamored of Mozart that he actually changed his middle name to Amadeus, the A in E.T.A. And in his writings, E.T.A. Hoffmann could not have been any clearer. For him, Mozart and Haydn were both romantic composers, not classical. He heard Mozart's poignant lyricism, and he considered it the very essence of Romanticism. Would Rosen have failed Hoffmann in his music history course? Who knows? But whether classical or romantic, at least those labels were applied with respect. That's often not the case with artistic styles. The magnificent Baroque era that gave us the Palace of Versailles, in which Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi raised music to such an exalted level, got its name later from people who really didn't think much of it. The word Baroque had actually been used to describe a pearl that was not perfectly round, that was misshapen, or a statement that was absurdly complicated. After a revolution in style upended the complexity of the Baroque, a new paradigm emerged that was lighter, more cheerful, suitable for enlightened aristocrats. But even this style was later named by its detractors. The Rococo era was named for a word for over-the-top decoration, rocaille, which they mixed with Baroque to come up with Rococo. As for J.S. Bach, he wanted nothing to do with this trendy new fashion that was tailor-made for the Enlightenment, the new age of reason that was sweeping across Europe, replacing the pious mysticism of the Baroque. He remained steadfast. If it's Baroque, don't fix it. However, two of his sons would achieve enormous fame in this new Rococo style, and for all its seeming frivolity, the Rococo actually had a very different side. Like the neoclassical style, it searched for inspiration in antiquity. In particular, writers like Alexander Pope and painters like Jacques-Louis David were looking for models of symmetry, structures that exhibited restraint, balance, order, in contrast to the frenzy and grandeur of the Baroque. And this new style of theirs came to be called neoclassicism. Why the prefix neo? Well, because visual arts and literature had already had a classical period over 1,000 years ago in ancient Roman Greece. This was just a revival of sorts. But music had not. Music hadn't even been able to agree on what the notes should be most of the time, and even when it did, it hadn't written them down in a precise way. Music was long overdue for its own classical period. Perhaps it was Haydn in plain view. Enter the Annus Mirabilis of 1732. The year that saw the birth of both the father of the classical period in music, as well as the father of the United States of America, George Washington. Coincidence? Maybe. They were both children of the Enlightenment, but the year they were born was not the only thing they had in common. Like the neoclassicists, America's founding fathers sought inspiration from the ancients, from classical sources, borrowing from Athenian democracy and Roman republican governance. But America's founders knew that in the long run, these hallowed forms of government had failed. Their solution was to create checks and balances. The U.S. Constitution was not meant to create an ideal world, but to ensure peace and cooperation between people with different ideals. And that is a fairly precise metaphor for the classical style in music. Passion is balanced by reflection, fast is balanced by slow, high by low, loud by soft. And musical phrases are both individual with their own autonomy, but also linked for the common good. And above all this, always an overarching symmetry. This delicate balancing act is evident in every measure of Mozart's Rondo alla Turca. The classical style united the two threads of Rococo style exemplified by the sons of J.S. Bach. Johann Christian Bach represented the galant style, graceful and cheerful, inspired by French composers like François Couperin with his mysterious barricades. This gallant style of J.C. Bach was initially the greatest influence on Mozart, giving his music its great elegance. But J.C. Bach also introduced Mozart to the music of his father, J.S. Bach, and Mozart soon incorporated the elder Bach's fugal style into his music. Continuing with the alphabet, another Bach son, C.P.E. Bach, represented the contrasting Empfinzimer style, which was dramatic, even passionate, and it utilized this new style called Sturm und Drang, storm and stress. And C.P.E. Bach was actually even more influential on Mozart, as we can hear in the storm and stress of his 25th Symphony. C.P.E. Bach was every bit as influential on Haydn as well, and Mozart and Haydn were destined to become great friends as they fused the two opposing styles of the Rococo into something classic. And this is where the perspective of our friend E.T.A. Hoffmann differs from our modern vision, but that of course is with the advantage of hindsight, which is always 20/20. Hoffmann saw romantic passion being injected into the stately Rococo, and he viewed it as the defining feature, a new romantic style. But it's actually the diplomatic cooperation between these two elements that gives the classical style its magic. Mozart and Haydn arrived at their classical synthesis at the same time, around the year 1775, but they got there by very different paths. Like Mozart many years later, Haydn was born a child prodigy in Austria, but his rewards proved to be very different. Unlike Mozart, at age 5, his parents sent Haydn away to the capitals of Austria, where he was supposed to learn music and sing as a professional chorister. Inexplicably, he he was treated rather like Oliver Twist, and after being starved for several years, he was beaten with a cane and then tossed out into the streets. Things had to get better from there. Well, Austro-Hungarian Empress Maria Theresa may not have liked Haydn's singing voice, but nobody could accuse him of being lazy. So the next thing he did was to invent the string quartet. This new, enlightened style of music making was made possible in large part by the aristocrats of the time, who were not only patrons of the arts who enjoyed fine music, but often very capable musicians in their own right, who enjoyed playing music in the new style. The baron for whom Haydn wrote these string quartets was so grateful that he helped Haydn find his first job as Kapellmeister, meaning music director, for a prince who had his own orchestra. And with this orchestra now at his disposal, Haydn set about inventing the symphony. Now, composers had been writing symphonies, thousands of them, but they weren't in the modern format we know today that came to dominate orchestral music, really dominate classical music itself. Haydn started with symphonies in 3 movements, as would Mozart, but their later symphonies were in the 4-movement structure that became the gold standard, in which Beethoven, Brahms, and Tchaikovsky would all write their greatest masterpieces. Although there was a lot of variation, this typically meant that the first movement was a fast movement, allegro, followed by a slow movement, which could be either adagio or andante. This was then followed by a third movement, which was either a minuet and trio or a more lively scherzo, meaning humorous, which livened up the stately minuet dance. And then finally, a finale, usually another fast allegro again. So, from an inauspicious beginning, Haydn was now a success, and he landed the plum job of his career as court musician for the royal Esterházy family. The only drawback for Haydn was that he was now out in the sticks, because the rest of it was great. The Esterházy family was led by 2 princes in succession, both of whom were great musical connoisseurs who supported Haydn in every way. So even though he was out now in rural Hungary, we know that he knew how to turn lemons into lemonade. And he said that this isolation gave him the time he needed to experiment, and the fruits of those experiments were the perfection of the classical forms that would dominate serious music for the next 200 years. And as he worked with the Esterházy Orchestra, Haydn was not just the father of the classical style, but also a cherished father figure to his musicians. They called him Papa Haydn, and rightly so, because he looked out for the well-being of every one of them. His Farewell Symphony, number 45, is a famous testament to his paternal devotion. So Haydn delivered their plea in music, in the last movement, with each musician in turn getting up and walking off the stage. And it worked. The next day, they all went home. And Haydn would also be called Papa by Mozart. How much Mozart was influenced by his new mentor is hard to say. Mozart was a force of nature blazing his own path. But the depth of affection and mutual respect between the two of them is breathtaking. Mozart called Haydn his best friend, and Haydn told Mozart's father, Leopold, "Your son is the greatest composer known to me." The fates would cut Mozart's thread excruciatingly short at just age 35. But Haydn would then go on to be both a mentor and teacher to the young Beethoven, and there, the influences are crystal clear. The fingerprints of Haydn's style are all over Beethoven's compositions.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
By now, Haydn was a deeply beloved and admired composer. And late in life, he did a star turn in Britain, where he wrote his brilliant set of London symphonies that brought the total number of his published symphonies to an astonishing 104. And full of respect for his predecessors Bach and Handel, he decided to revive Handel's oratorio form and wrote 2 masterpieces for chorus, The Creation and The Seasons. As with Handel and his Messiah, when Haydn wrote his creation, he meant it. And when God says, "Let there be light," we witness the creation in harmonies. Now, admittedly, it can be daunting for a fledgling music lover to navigate Haydn's 68 string quartets and 104 symphonies. But take it from me, just starting with his 12 London symphonies and his 12 string quartets, opuses 64 and 76, you'll find a whole lifetime's worth of listening pleasure. While the star of Haydn rose gradually throughout his life, the stardom of his young friend Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart has blazed like a comet into our own time. It's almost impossible not to love Mozart, both the music and the man. Impossible, that is, unless you're envious. And that's what made Peter Shaffer's elaborate fantasy play Amadeus about Mozart and Salieri so irresistible. We're told that Mozart was the most celebrated child prodigy of all time, sure. But never before had anyone illustrated how grossly unfair that is to the rest of us. Salieri in real life was a nurturing teacher, a mentor to many major composers. Wolfgang's father, Leopold Mozart, considered his son a miracle, and Leopold was blessed with not just one, but 2 miracles, Wolfgang and his older sister Nannerl, who was an equally talented child prodigy. It wasn't long before the Mozart family went on tour, and the child prodigy siblings were performing for the most important royalty across Europe, with the Mozart legend growing at every turn. Mozart's gift was indeed profound. He was composing pieces at age 5. He could hear a piece once and remember it forever, or reproduce it instantly on the piano. But most importantly, almost every piece he wrote from the age of 19 on, when his classical style snapped into focus around 1775, remains timeless. Indeed, Mozart capped the year 1775 by completing his 5 violin concertos, which established the new classical paradigm for the concerto form, replacing the Baroque concerto style of Vivaldi and Corelli. Mozart almost instantly began pulling from this new classical style like taffy from every angle. For Mozart, the new style was really like a playground that he could do anything on. His concertos use the classical sonata form, which is actually a bit of a hybrid, both ternary in 3 parts and binary in 2 parts. Its ternary form is in 3 parts, A, B, A, but its roots are binary. So the A section, the first section, is usually repeated before going on to the BA section. And in concertos, which feature both an orchestra and a soloist, this typically meant that the first section, the A section, was played by the orchestra alone. And then for the repeat of the A section, the exposition, the soloist would then join in. And this is all very democratic, unless you're the soloist, and you have to sit around for several minutes waiting to come in. Well, Mozart wasn't sure he wanted to be upstaged by his own work, so he decides to interrupt the orchestra almost immediately. The orchestra tries to start the exposition. And Mozart just jumps right in with the piano. Well, the orchestra tries again. And again, Mozart cuts them right off. What Mozart was really doing here was setting the stage for the piano concerto form he invented. It now became a friendly rivalry between orchestra and soloist. Mozart would run up a huge total of 27 piano concertos, and each of the mature ones was unique in its own way, along with concertos for other instruments like clarinet. His popular Concerto No. 21 in C major would then become doubly famous when it was used by Ingmar Bergman for his film Elvira Madigan. The slow movement has the most gentle F major theme. This then contrasts with a dark, chromatic theme. But then, when the main theme returns, it doesn't come back in the tonic F major we'd expect. Instead, Mozart launches off into the remote key of A-flat major and ornaments the melody like it's being sung. Mozart is now infusing his operatic style into his instrumental works. Mozart delights in teasing the listener's expectations, and his mischief-making wasn't just limited to the world of instrumental music. Opera had been overhauled since the Baroque by the transformative composer Christoph Willibald Gluck, and Mozart capitalized on Gluck's innovations. But Mozart also added in his own very personal brand of political mischief, an acute and very modern social criticism that started to undermine the aristocratic world with its hereditary rule. Like Haydn before him, who had been restricted by his duties for Prince Esterhazy, Mozart was tied to his birthplace of Salzburg, both by law and by pressure from his traditionalist father Leopold. Well, Mozart insisted on gaining his independence, and it was finally granted to him, literally, with a kick to the posterior. When Mozart set up shop in Vienna, his independent streak revealed itself fully. And in the first of his 3 comic opera buffa collaborations with the librettist Lorenzo da Ponte, Mozart insisted on using source material that had already been banned by the authorities, a play by Pierre Beaumarchais called The Marriage of Figaro. Beaumarchais' play was a sequel to his popular comedy The Barber of Seville, later made immortal by Rossini. But The Marriage of Figaro was far more controversial, with its frank portrayal of class struggle and aristocratic despotism. When the character of Count Almaviva perceives his young page Cherubino to be a menace to his philandering, Almaviva simply drafts Cherubino into his military regiment and sends him off to war. Figaro teases him that he will no longer go flitting around like a lovesick butterfly. Non più andrai. Mozart and Da Ponte managed to soften the revolutionary undertone of the play enough to satisfy Viennese Emperor Joseph II. And the play's ending is appropriately happy, with everyone forgiven for their foibles, Figaro himself happily married, and the rogue Count Almaviva is chastened, but with his head still on his shoulders. Lesson learned. In Mozart's second collaboration with Da Ponte, the amoral aristocrat Don Giovanni would not end so well. The Marriage of Figaro had been successful enough in Vienna, but it was wildly popular in Prague, where Czech audiences had already started recognizing Mozart as the greatest living composer. In fact, you could hear Mozart's arias being whistled and sung on street corners all over the city. So, by popular demand, Mozart returned to Prague with his tale of the lecherous nobleman Don Giovanni, an unrepentant scoundrel who would seduce innocent women using the most beautiful melodies. In the end, Don Giovanni faces the music as the stone statue of the commendatore he killed at the beginning of the opera arrives to exact justice, set at a banquet where Giovanni's musicians are actually playing Non più andrai from The Marriage of Figaro. Giovanni's servant Leporello comments that he is all too familiar with the tune, a wonderful inside joke that's a testament to Mozart's already huge celebrity status. Figaro and Giovanni are now cornerstones of the operatic repertory. And in Mozart's third and final collaboration with his librettist Da Ponte, they leave class politics behind and instead take up sexual politics between men and women with the provocative title Così fan tutte, meaning women are like that. Mozart managed to imbue the comic opera genre with serious thought, and near the end of his life, he even managed to do the same with a collection of fairy tales compiled by his friend Emanuel Schikaneder. By this time in his life, Mozart's own thoughts had taken on a far more serious turn and joined the Freemasons, a group that included American founders like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. Mozart's own life was no stranger to tragedy. He and his sister Nannerl were the only two surviving children of 7 siblings. And with his wife Constanza, Mozart himself had fathered 6 children, but again, only 2 survived. He increasingly relied on Masonic philosophy, even to console his own father as Leopold neared death. In the Magic Flute, Mozart turns the fanciful tales into an allegory, a fable of man's journey from the Queen of the Night's kingdom of darkness to enlightenment, with the transcendent power of music represented by the magical flute, needed to unify humanity. Did Mozart suspect that his own life thread would be cut short? This question has been raised ever since his death in 1791, and it's really a reflection of our own discomfort with the circumstances of his leaving us at age 35. We feel uncertain about the cause of his death, uneasy about the nature of his burial, disturbed by the strange timing of the commission he received for his final Requiem. While this has led to centuries of myth-making, none of it changes the truth of the beautiful reality Mozart envisioned for us. Mozart's world is one in which true love and cheerful family life are indeed possible, provided we are capable of forgiveness. For like the confused ladies of Così fan tutte, we all have human flaws and we must forgive each other for everything. Unless, of course, like Don Giovanni, we brazenly refuse to repent and don't deserve mercy. And Mozart's world was also one in which humanity was ready to break free from aristocratic rule by those born better than them. And that final leap would be taken by an artist of unparalleled boldness who admired Mozart to no end, Ludwig van Beethoven.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hillsdale College Online Courses podcast. If you want to continue learning about classical education or other topics, please visit hillsdale.edu/course. There you will find over 40 free online courses, including Constitution 101, The Real American Founding, American Citizenship and Its Decline, and many more. The courses include additional readings, study guides, fully produced videos, and you can chat with your fellow students on a dedicated forum. Upon completing a course, you will also get a certificate. All our courses are free because we believe that a virtuous citizen is the best defense for liberty. So pursue the education necessary for freedom and happiness at hillsdale.edu/course today. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Thanks for listening.